Hopefully you, thank you to my colleague that hit record. I appreciate that. I'm Jody Rao. I use she, her pronouns. I'm one of the managers with the coalition. We've got Allison Eisinger, our executive director, our office manager, Rachel, with us, Sarah Robbins, another manager with the coalition. And I think you'll hear from most of us today at some point. So welcome, good morning. We are going to have a discussion about emergency housing vouchers today. We've got a really amazing group of folks to do a little naloxone training and to talk about what it's like using that in the field and sharing their expertise. We're going to have Seattle Human Services Coalition here to talk about wage equity and their campaign. And then we might have time for member announcements. I'm really trying to get better about this, but we have a lot of really wonderful information to share with you all. So we might get jammed at the end a little bit. Closed captioning has been enabled. So if that is something that is helpful for you, hopefully you can see that. We are recording, as hopefully you just heard the announcement, and then we'll have this up on our website after the fact. We do love to see faces and cameras on, but we totally understand that at this point in life, for most of us, that can feel hard, and we're just happy you're here. But we would love to see your pronouns. We would love to see your agency. You will not be recorded unless you come off mute. So if you want to stay off of the recording, you can just throw things into the chat and we'll make sure that that gets addressed. Rachel, will you switch to our mission statement? And if I could invite somebody to read our mission statement, that would be lovely.
Good morning. The mission statement says we mobilize our community to challenge systemic causes of homelessness and advocate for housing justice.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Okay, well, we are going to get going here since we have a lot to cover. So we're going to start off really getting a discussion and some updates and some celebrations on emergency housing vouchers this morning. So we've got Christy Johnson from King County Housing Authority. We've got Peter Lynn from the King County Regional Homelessness Authority, and we have Alice Kimboa from Seattle Housing Authority. So welcome to you all. And I'm going to start to share my screen with Christy's slides, and we'll go from there. So here we go.
Great, Jody. While you get that set up, I'll just kick us off if you don't mind.
Please do.
Okay, so let me get my screen situated over here. So good morning, everybody. Thank you for allowing us to join today's meeting to provide an update on the Emergency Housing Voucher Program. I am joined by my colleagues Alice Chimbawa from the Seattle Housing Authority and Peter Lynn from the King County Regional Homeless Authority, as Jody mentioned. We curated a lot of information to share with you today, and given we have a limited amount of time, I'm going to cruise through this at a pretty fast clip. I'd ask, if you're able to save your questions for the end, or as an alternative, you can also put your questions in the chat, and I'm going to call on my colleagues Peter and Alice to see if they can address questions as they come up, just in case we don't have enough time to get to all of it at the end. Next slide is fine. This is the background slide. Just some context setting. On March 11th, 2021, President Biden signed the American Rescue Plan into law. The ARP provided $1.9 trillion to address the continued impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on the economy, public health, state and local governments, individuals, and businesses. Part of the ARP appropriated about $5 billion for new incremental emergency housing vouchers, the renewal of those emergency housing vouchers, as well as some fees for the cost to PHAs to administer the EHV voucher program. In addition to the EHVs, HUD also provided additional fees to facilitate the leasing of the emergency housing vouchers. HUD defined what those fees could be used for, but in general, they could be used to pay for things such as housing search assistance, funds to mitigate financial leasing barriers, and or support to support landlord retention or recruitment efforts. What HUD did not provide was funding with the vouchers to provide ongoing supportive services to ensure that people have a level of services that they need once they move into housing, effectively to remain stably housed. There were over 70,000 emergency housing vouchers allocated to over 600 public housing authorities across the country. HUD required that public housing authorities partner with local continuums of care to ensure that the EHVs went to those who were most in need in communities. And they also required public housing authorities memorialize this partnership with the COC through a memorandum of understanding, or MOU, which needed to be in place and executed by August 1st, 2021. HUD also outlined pretty ambitious leasing deadlines, which got us all a bit anxious knowing the rental market we have in front of us here in King County, but we're not alone in that. They required that all EHVs be fully leased by the end of December this year, so December 31, 2022. Another very important limitation that's worth noting today is that PHAs are not allowed to issue or reissue any recycled vouchers after September 30th of 2023. This basically means that if a voucher has not been issued by this date, or a previously housed EHV client loses their housing voucher, we effectively don't have any ability to reissue that voucher after September 30th of 2023. HUD is closely monitoring EHV utilization, PHA by PHA, Public Housing Authority that is, and has indicated that they will be issuing guidance later this summer to, with regards to plans and methodology that they'll use to revoke and reallocate any unused vouchers to another community. Next slide. HUD defined, I'm not going to belabor this, but HUD defined eligibility for the EHVs pretty broadly. They left it up to communities to prioritize how the EHVs would be used based upon local need. And they were also required that this be memorialized in the MOU between the PHA and the COC. In King County, priorities were established to utilize the emergency housing vouchers to target populations noted on the slide in green. And next, I'm going to go ahead and touch on the EHV awards made across the country and provide you with a peek of the HUD EHV dashboard, which is monitored on the daily by both HUD and the PHAs. Next slide. This data is updated as of Tuesday, the 14th of June. And for this view, what you'll see is I filtered on the awards by PHA based on largest to smallest award. So what you're seeing here is really only the top 19 public housing authorities awarded out of about 600 PHAs that were awarded vouchers. Of note, KCHA received the 15th largest award in the country, and SHA came in as receiving the 22nd largest award in the country. This is pretty remarkable when you think about the awards that were being made to over 600 public housing authorities across the United States. And I would also go so far as to say that in my 20-year working history at KCHA, this is by far the single largest investment I've seen HUD make in the Housing Choice Voucher Program that is targeting people experiencing or at high risk of experiencing homelessness. It should also be noted that for many PHAs across the country, including here in King County, standing up a large-scale housing choice voucher program in such short order is a pretty monumental undertaking. And let's not lose sight of the fact that this was all being done in the midst of a global pandemic, when many of our staff were and still are remote working, and also at a time when our regional homeless authority was also being stood up. Next slide. Let's go ahead and zoom into Washington State's EHV award for a quick moment. This view shows the total number of EHVs awarded in Washington State, which was 2,443. And as you can see, King County's award accounted for 54% of the state's EHV award. Next, I'm going to walk us through some key milestones pertaining to standing up the EHV voucher program. Next slide. On May 5th, public housing authorities were notified of an upcoming award, EHV award, and we were given the option to accept the full award, reject the award, or accept a smaller number of vouchers that HUD was making available to us. In King County, all PHAs accepted the full award, and we didn't let the grass grow under our feet. We got to work pretty quickly to start coordinating with the Regional Homeless Authority. In fact, I think, if I'm not mistaken, Peter, you can correct me, but I think Peter was literally weeks, if not days, into his new position when our work together really started. So our first course of action together was to develop our MOU, again, which was required by August 1st, 2021, to articulate our priorities, mutual goals, and accompanied roles and responsibilities between our entities. The Regional Homeless Authority got to work right away to develop relationships and memorandums of understanding with community-based partners, many of you on this call, that would support getting folks connected to, vouchered up, leased up, and ongoing stability once people move into housing. Currently, the Regional Homeless Authority has over 80 MOUs in place with community-based partners. And I think that's pretty remarkable too when you think about the short runway that we've been working on here. Simultaneously, the PHAs were hard at work to build out a referral, voucher issuance, lease-up projections. That was all based off of historical housing choice voucher data that we have been culminating for a number of years now. We were also building our internal capacity to support this monumental effort, building out application materials, training materials, monitoring dashboards, and staffing up as well. Next slide. Next, I'm going to dive into some King County specific data as it relates to referral, voucher issuance, and lease-up trends. This data is reflective of all three public housing authorities, King County, Seattle Housing Authority, and the Renton Housing Authority, all of whom are operating in King County. As I mentioned a moment ago, data tracking and monitoring dashboards was a critical component to what we were building as some of our tools when we were building the infrastructure, if you will, really to be able to measure our progress and course correct along the way as needed. Having this data and this dashboard has really allowed us to review the data each week. We meet together each week, look at the data, talk through some of the challenges or successes that we're seeing, and in some cases, course correct along the way. For example, when we discovered that referrals were not coming into us in the steady pace that we anticipated they would, we saw that in the data pretty quickly, and we were able to really course correct and bring additional staffing into our housing choice voucher departments to essentially help support them in getting vouchers in hands as quickly as possible so that people could really start on their housing search journey as early as possible. The data in these charts is representative of referrals and vouchers issued through June 8th. This is data that's pulled right from our King County dashboard. And I just really want to take a pause here for a minute and say thank you to everybody on this call for helping us achieve these referral targets so quickly. I think it, like I said, is a pretty monumental undertaking that we've all been supporting here. But let's shift gears real quick and switch to the next slide and look at what we're seeing by way of leasing trends. This data right here is showing our cumulative leasing assumptions against actuals, again through June 8th. Leasing utilization, just for those of you that don't know, is the #1 metric that HUD measures a public housing authority's performance. They base everything on utilization. So this is why sometimes those of you that work closely with your public housing authorities know that's what we're always pushing for, right? Is full utilization. The key takeaway from this chart is that leasing rates have lagged behind what our original projections forecasted. And I think it's important to note that even with the housing search that we are able to offer folks, you are able to offer folks, as well as the flexible funds to mitigate financial leasing barriers. We all on this call know all too well that there are external forces, some of which are beyond our control, that are making it difficult for people to find housing to lease up in. These include low vacancy rates, increasing rental costs, all of which is impacting areas of King County that historically have been more affordable and accessible to people with vouchers. For example, South King County, we're seeing rents skyrocket at pretty high rates in South King County, which is a bit startling on a lot of levels. Next, I'm going to shift gears. If you want to go to the next slide. Switching back to the HUD EHV dashboard, you will see that the national EHV leasing rates show that about 33.65% of the EHVs awarded across the country have been leased. And here you will see the number of EHVs leased by KCHA ranks 5th in the country, and SHA is showing 14th in the country with relation to the number of EHVs leased. When you include all 3 of the PHAs in King County, according to the HUD dashboard, our overall leasing rate is 53%, or 696 people housed out of the 1,300 vouchers that we have available. Now let's zoom in and see how King County compares to Washington State leasing rates. Next slide. Washington State average is faring, oh, I'm sorry, did somebody say something?
Oh, I'm so sorry, Christy. That was me clearing my throat
Oh.
gently. So thank you for hearing me, because while this is all actually really important, we want to make sure that we have a chance to actually wrap up your presentation part quickly and make sure that we get to hear from you, Peter and Alice, and answer a couple of pretty crucial questions that folks have without skimping on the celebration of good work thus far. Thanks.
Yep, I'm almost done, Allison. So in Washington State, you're going to see that our average leasing rate is faring a little bit ahead of the national average. We can go to the next slide. To wrap us up quickly, I just wanted to touch on what's ahead. And that really is, I can't emphasize enough how grateful we are to all of you and your team's work to get us to where we are in almost 12 months. So I think that's worth noting. A big round of applause for everybody. We also need to keep pushing forward to achieve full lease up by the end of this year, when HUD is expected to take that snapshot and make decisions about revoking and reallocating unused vouchers. And I think the next thing, which is a perfect segue into what Peter is going to talk about, is how do we support people to maintain their housing once they lease up. I'll stop there. Peter, do you want to go ahead and jump in?
Great, thanks, Christy. I really appreciate the partnerships that have been built with the organizations. We had, as was indicated, 80 separate organizational agreements with partners. There are about half of them were current contractors with the city or county, City of Seattle or King County when we started working with them, and the other half are smaller organizations that we're not, working with and publicly funded by King County or the City of Seattle. And I wanted to just take a minute and appreciate the number of organizations and the variety of organizations that worked with us to make those agreements and step forward. We do not have tenancy support or housing navigation support funding for this program. And I think one of the things that was both a barrier and a limitation on the capacity of organizations was folks are stretched pretty thin to begin with. And the resources necessary to guide folks through these programs did not accompany the, this allocation of vouchers. So most organization, we did have a statement in the agreements that folks had about the necessary supports that we were expecting from partner organizations, while appreciating the fact that there wasn't any administrative or there wasn't any operating funding for those, for those needs. We did receive funding through the city of Seattle. We are about to release an RFP for housing navigation and tenancy support services for organizations that have agreements and that are supporting households. So I want to alert folks to that. Keep an eye on our funding opportunities page on the website at the King County Regional Homelessness Authority, because there will be an opportunity to support folks with the kinds of tenancy support and housing navigation support services funding that is vital to the long-term maintenance of a program like this. It is possible, as Christy said, that we could get another allocation of vouchers. There are underutilized vouchers. There have been PHAs that have surrendered their vouchers back to HUD, indicating that they can't use them. And that is since we are leading in the national, we're well above national average, we could expect to potentially benefit from reallocations. And there is also the hope that, seeing this program of effectiveness, we could get a new appropriations from Congress to fund additional vouchers. I think that would, I think, as we can all appreciate, vouchers represent the most durable source of long-term housing stability support that we can offer folks. And, it is the sort of gold standard of of anti-poverty, anti-homelessness programming. And, we can all hope. I think it's unconscionable that we have over 300,000 vouchers that are out with PHAs that have not got the funding to actually pull them off the shelf and put them into deployment. And that is one of the things that, I think the success of this program is really, is a really powerful reminder to folks about the depth of need for this kind of program.
And I'm not gonna say much, because I think Christy and Peter have shared most of what I would have shared as well. As you can see, Christy shared the data for all PHAs in the region, including Seattle Housing Authority. And I would like to also piggyback and relay my gratitude for those of you who've really partnered in this cause and got us to where we are today. I guess an addition is that we are now moving to doing more business in person, which is going to really hopefully change how we do what we do and hopefully improve upon what we already have set up. We've had so much success as is within this environment, it was new for us to engage with clients. As you all know, as Christy shared, we're really trying to focus on the hardest to house. And with that population come a lot of challenges, including staying connected with them. And so hopefully with the in-person options that we will have, we will be able to issue more vouchers and be able to support families as they move through the leasing process and ultimately become stabilized. So I just wanted to put it out there that, there are going to be more options for us to contact families in person. And Seattle Housing, and I'm sure KCH and Renton Housing Authority as well, we are willing to work with you to see what works for you and works for your staff, for us to be able to be better partners even as we move forward to continue leasing up the vouchers. Again, really grateful for the partnership and the success that we've achieved as a collective so far, and I look forward to the continued work.
Thank you so much, Alice, and thank you, Peter and Christy. I want to note the extraordinary work that you and your staff at each of your respective organizations, and of course Renton Housing Authority, as Alice noted, is part of this as well. But to reciprocate your thanks to community organization partners, and to thank you and your staff. These have not been easy circumstances, and it's true that the EHVs unrolled in the pandemic. They unrolled because of the pandemic, I think it is fair to say. And I do want to note for everyone, since we are an advocacy organization, that the possibility that there could be another round of EHVs is one that we will need to advocate for. I think most people on this call are aware that the Build Back Better legislation stalled out because of obstructionism in the United States Congress, but that is another opportunity to mobilize people to emphasize how incredibly important it is to focus on housing of many sorts, including additional vouchers, in federal legislation in this what remains of the spring and summer. So you should be watching your email for action alerts from us. It is true that our US senators and our congressional delegation are generally already very supportive. And it's also true that they still need to hear from us that these are priority issues that we need and want them to fight for. So as that opportunity shows up, we will be sharing it with you. And I know there are additional questions. I just wondered, Peter, if you could repeat the timing of the RFP that's about to come out so that people are aware of that.
We're expecting to release that RFP within the next 2 weeks. So it should be either next week or the week after.
Thank you so much. Wonderful. I think if people have additional questions, it would be fair to invite you to put them in the chat. I don't know if Alice, Christy, and Peter have the opportunity to stay for a little bit longer and potentially respond to some questions in the chat, or we can share those with you afterwards. And I know that we have another significant hour of agenda, so I am going to suggest that Jody, you take the reins back again. And unless I'm messing up the agenda, I will just express our, real appreciation. This is not easy to do this work under these conditions, and people need homes. And it has been wonderful to hear the stories that Karina and many of you here have been able to share with us. And I want to just remind you, those stories of people whose lives really have truly been transformed by the opportunity to have the home that every single person needs and deserves. Those stories are powerful education and advocacy tools. So drop us a quick email. We will work with you to shape those stories as a useful advocacy tool. And of course, we all know, wonderful as these vouchers are, they're not enough for all of the people who need homes in our community. So we still have a lot more work to do. And thanks to the people who are helping to maximize this incredible and necessary resource.
Thank you, Allison. Thank you, Christy, Peter, Alice, and to all of you working so hard on these EHVs. I think what I might suggest is for our attendees, if throw those questions, as Allison suggested, into the chat. And if our esteemed guest cannot stay, we'll make a concerted effort to follow up with them and maybe collect some of the key questions that are popping up so we can post that as part of our blog response after the fact. So thank you so much. We are going to move on to the second portion of today's agenda. This is what I'm calling a mini naloxone training. I am sure everyone on our panel today could have used the entire hour and a half to talk about naloxone and all of their expertise and many different things, but we want to give folks an opportunity. Wen Dang from Kelly Ross Pharmacy is here, and she's going to present initially just a little bit for anybody that is not as familiar with naloxone. What is it? Safety, kind of going over the basics. And then Wen will stay and will be joined by Maggie from the Public Health Robert Cluess Center, Alex, Karen, and Jules from REACH as experts that are in the field and working with folks that are using this, and you all can ask the questions to them, and we'll hear their expertise. So Wen, take it away, please.
Right. Thank you so much for inviting me. My name's Wen, and I'm a pharmacy resident at Kelly Ross Pharmacy. So I presented naloxone in Washington Poison Center last year. I also taught about naloxone in UW School of Pharmacy. So very happy to be here and give a mini training on naloxone for people who are not as familiar. So I will use Narcan and naloxone interchangeably, but naloxone is the generic for Narcan, and Narcan is the brand nasal spray. Naloxone come in different form, like nasal spray, generic nasal spray, and intramuscular injection, auto injection, but the nasal spray is the easiest one to use. So I will refer it as a brand name Narcan, but anyway, that's I'm gonna use the name interchangeably. It is a life-saving medication and it's used to treat opioid overdose. Narcan can block and reverse an overdose from opioid, and that include heroin, fentanyl, and prescription opioid medication. It is very easy to use and it can save lives in emergency, just like EpiPen can save people in severe allergic reaction. Anyone who requests Narcan naloxone can get it from their pharmacy. You do not need a prescription for Narcan naloxone, and is usually covered by insurances. And here I listed someone who should consider carry a Narcan. People who might interact with people use drugs, like friends, family, emergency personnel. And if you say, oh, I bike across the 3rd Avenue and I pass through some homelessness camp, for sure you can carry Narcan, naloxone. And people who might experience overdose, that include people receive high dose of opioid who had a history of previous opioid overdose. They use alcohol, antidepressant, benzodiazepine, muscle relaxant, or seizure medication are at higher risk of having opioid overdose. People who have some lung condition, who are smoking cigarette, they have asthma, COPD, they are more likely to have opioid overdose because opioid overdose is a breathing emergency, and if they have underlying issue with their lung, they're more likely to have breathing emergency. History of substance use, anxiety and depression, history of kidney or liver disease. That's because if someone who have like impaired kidney or liver, they are breaking down the opioid slower and they are having a higher exposure to opioid and they are more likely to have an overdose. Last year I had an overdose project at a health association, and I researched all the people who had opioid in 1 year. And I actually find not everyone is on high dose opioid, but almost all of them are on like antidepressant or other medication that could interact with opioid that all work on the central nervous system. So people who are on antidepressant are at higher risk. And we shouldn't think that only people take high dose opioid can get overdose. Anyone can have opioid overdose. And here,
Wen, sorry to interrupt you. Would you be able to make your screen a little bit bigger?
of course,
Thank you. Sorry to interrupt you.
of course. Is this one a little bit better? Huh, too big.
I think that looks great. Thank you.
Of course. And here are some signs of opioid overdose: unusual sleepiness or not responsive, breathing very slowly, slow heartbeat or low blood pressure, skin feels cold or clammy, pinpoint pupil, their pupil are very tiny, and their lips and their nails are blue. So here is a good summary of the information where you can get Narcan in Washington. So as I mentioned, you do not need a prescription to receive naloxone. And if you click this link, which I open it over here, this is stopoverdose.org. It's a really good website. And you can just put stopoverdose.com, find naloxone in Washington, and you can put in your location and it tells you where you can go to get Narcan. It's either a pharmacy or community program. And another great resources is our pharmacy, Kelly Ross Pharmacy. People can put in their name, their address, their gender identity, and they can request one free Naloxone Kit. I will show you what the website look like. So if you click the link, this is what it looked like. Kelly Ross. So this is a naloxone mail order. You put your name, address, city. This is only open for King County residents, but I will show you the resources for non-King County residents. So each of them can get a free Narcan shipped to their home. And if you are a representative for college, university, or high school, you can send a naloxone request to my boss. Her name is Annalisa. So if you need order a large quantity of naloxone for a facility, you can send your request to my boss. That's her email. For non-King County resident, here's the link for the non-King County residents. And it's the same as the mail order. They can get one kit for free. And at the end, I put entity naloxone request for someone, for entity that's not from Washington. And it's from narcan.com directly. In the end, it says community program request form. So you can fill it out and it will come from narcan.com. All right, next we move to how to administer Narcan naloxone. First, you want to identify opioid overdose and check for response. Shout out their name, asking if they're okay, and shake their shoulders and do the sternum rub and see if that person are waking up. And then you check for the signs of opioid overdose, which we just went over.
And when can you speak a little bit to, and maybe some of our panelists can after your presentation, but what overdose looks like in terms of skin change and colors on darker complexions?
That's a really good question. I haven't had like a personal experience, but the thing I will look for are like not being responsive, slow breathing, and their pimple being tiny. But I haven't had personal experience of helping darker complexion patients who might have overdose.
Okay, we'll hold that for our panel and maybe they have some information on that. Thank you.
And then you give naloxone nasal spray. It's very straightforward. You remove it from the package and you hold the Narcan spray with your thumb on the bottom and with your first and middle finger on either side of the nozzle, and you gently put the nasal in either nostril and you just press it firmly, and it works very quickly in 2 to 3 minutes. And now is a good time to call 911, tell where you are and someone is not breathing. And then you move the person on their side in recovery position. So if they want it, they won't choke themselves and aspirate. And then you watch the person closely. You don't want to just walk away after you give Narcan. If the person does not respond, you want to give another nasal spray come in the box. Each box come with 2 nasal spray. You give to the other nostril, just firmly press it. Okay, so it's very, very important that you have the help on the way because the duration of action of Narcan is shorter than most opioid. So people might wake up, but they can fall back to overdose. So it's very important that they go to urgent care emergency room and get treated. Naloxone is very, very safe. So when you're in doubt, it will not harm that individual if you give Narcan. It's very effective. However, it doesn't work for other overdose, non-opioid overdose like cocaine, benzodiazepine, methamphetamine, and alcohol. It doesn't work for other overdose. Narcan can cause opioid withdrawal. So it's not fun to have opioid withdrawal. It's very miserable. People might have fever, they feel agitated, they have increased blood pressure, heart rate, vomiting. They won't be very happy. So it's a good idea to be around them, provide support and comfort, and make sure help is on the way. And last is, I'm repeating myself, make sure the person who went through the opioid overdose seek medical attention after using Narcan. In the end, I will talk about the Washington Good Samaritan law. If you seek medical assistance in a drug-related overdose, you and the victim will not be prosecuted for drug possession. And that concludes my short mini training on naloxone.
Thank you so much. Before we move on to the panel, I just want to see if anybody, we have a question in the chat. Should we not give naloxone when someone is sitting, only when lying down?
Oh, sorry, I'm trying to read the chat.
I know they were coming in fast and furious there, which is great.
Okay. You can definitely give the people Narcan when they're sitting. They do not have to be laying down. But I'm thinking when someone is having overdose, they might feel unconscious and they might pass out. And when they're in a sitting position, if they do not have support, they might fall down and fall to the ground and might hit their head. So laying position will be preferred.
Great.
But I don't think it's wrong if you just rush there and give someone when they're in their sitting position. Is that necessary to prime the Narcan nasal spray plunger before you use it? You just press it. You don't need to prime it. You just press it.
And in fact, priming, you can actually lose some of the medicine. Is that correct?
Yes. I know, but for other medication like nasal spray or like inhaler, sometimes like prime is required, but not for Narcan.
Yeah, and then Seth is asking, what do we do to respond within 2 minutes, but wants to leave the area before help comes? So somebody that they've reversed overdose, but within a few minutes before help is coming, that they're wanting to leave. Any thoughts on that?
If you have someone else on the scene, you can ask them to watch for that person. That would be ideal. That would be ideal if you can have another person watching this person while the help is on the way.
Yeah. And then we've got a question about where's for folks that are using intramuscular injections of Narcan or naloxone, where is the best place to give that?
I haven't had many experience with the IM injection. I will defer this question to other expert. I'm thinking like the thigh, outer thigh would be a good location, or their upper gluteal would be a good location.
Okay. Well, thank you, Wen. I'm not seeing any more coming in fast and furious, and I want to introduce our panel. So I'm going to start with our wonderful REACH colleagues, Jules, Alex, and Karen. If you all would like to just quickly introduce yourselves, and then we'll move on to Maggie, and then we'll ask a few questions of you all. So Jules, please take the floor.
Hi, good morning, everybody. Thanks for having us. I'm very excited to share my expertise and perspective on this topic. It's very important to me. My name is Jules. I use they, them pronouns, and I'm an outreach care coordinator with the REACH program through Evergreen Treatment Services. I have worked in the homeless services field and harm reduction field 7 to 10 years, depending on which service exactly we're talking about. I have background in supporting the drug using community outside of homeless spaces, and I have probably used naloxone at least 30 times since its inception in the field and in service settings. Thanks for having me. Karen, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. Thanks, Jules. I'm Karen Salinas, she, they pronouns. I'm the director of outreach. I've been working in harm reduction since about 2014 in DC, San Diego, and then now here in Seattle.
Hey folks, I'm Alex. I use he, him pronouns. I am Reach's training coordinator. Been at Reach for a little over 4 years. Started out as a housing case manager there before moving into training coordination around 2 years ago. I am not actually serving on this panel, but I'm just helping to coordinate in the background. But it is lovely to see all of you and be here. And yeah, thanks.
And Maggie, would you please introduce yourself?
Hi, my name is Maggie, they, them. I'm an education specialist at the Robert Cluess Center, which is like King County Public Health Syringe Service Program.
Wonderful. Well, I'm wondering if you all have thoughts from your perspective and your expertise of some of the questions that were coming in through the panel, and then going back to what overdose might look like and how to identify that on darker complexion. So any one of you, please take the floor.
Well,
yeah, sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead, Jules.
I was just looking back through the chat. I believe the question about what overdose looks like in darker complexion folks, generally, if you have a lighter complexion, you will turn blue or purple from a lack of oxygen. However, in darker complexion people, it usually appears more grayish or more ashy. There's less warmth from the blood vessels on the surface of the skin, or the, excuse me, capillaries. So it's going to look less, there's going to be less like flushing and more kind of like pallor complexion. I'm not sure if there was another.
I'll just add on to that, Jules, too. Another is you can look at someone's nail beds if they're not wearing nail polish like I am, but you'll see the oxygenation losing in their nail beds. So you can tell from there if you feel like a pulse checking right in their neck. If it's like thin and thready, that's like another indication. The one about someone sitting, if they're slumped up against something, like to keep in mind they're ODing, so they're unconscious. If they're upright sitting, they're not ODing because they're not unconscious. If they're slumped though, that's something different. And then just remembering that people might throw up when they're ODing. So if you're gonna be doing any breathing or like injecting anything and putting anything in their mouth, making sure that there's nothing blocking the airway. So you can put them on the side and, you know, try not to put your fingers in someone's mouth, but try not to have the airway blocked either. And then you can always look around someone's lips. That can be an indication of losing oxygen. And then another question I saw was you can put in the tricep area for IM. And then if folks want to ask some questions, I think those are the ones I saw in the chat.
Yeah, I think, Maggie, anything that you would add to this conversation? And then I have a question, one more from the chat to all of you.
Sure. Yeah, a couple of things. I appreciate all you folks. We give out the IM form of Narcan at the Robert Cluess Center. So that's like what we provide, and we get a lot of really positive feedback about it. It can be a little bit intimidating, I think, for people at first, but it's very user friendly. It's just an IM injection like everyone has described. So front of the thighs, top of the arm, but just positionally, whatever is appropriate. I wanted to mention maybe some limitations of the Good Samaritan law that I think are important to know about. You can have legal consequences if you have a warrant or there's any evidence of distribution at the site of overdose. So I think just empowering people to know the limitations of that law and doing what's best for them in that moment. Sometimes the best thing to do is to call 911 for more help and leave if that's the best option you have. So yeah, we talk a lot about that here. Yeah, and then I think also just like reminding folks that are responding to overdose just how critically important and loving that act is, and to really just remember to take a breath take a breath yourself first. And I feel like that's a good reminder for everybody.
Thank you, Maggie. I
Thanks,
love
Maggie, for adding that. Oh, sorry. I was just
Oh.
going to add on to.
Go for it, Karen. Take it away.
No, because Maggie, that's a great point, like around their legal status and all that, because it is a very real consideration, and I think that points to the coercive positions that we put clients in often, or folks that use drugs in often, because they are in this choice of saving their life or their friend's life, or going to jail, or possibly, you know, facing their legal consequences for what they have going on. So that in general puts people in a very unsafe space to begin with. But I think I saw, you know, if someone wants to leave 2 minutes after reviving, maybe because of those legal issues, that would be something to talk about, because people can often fall into overdose again after the first administration. And so if they're going to do that, prep them on that. Be like, you could fall out again in a couple minutes and be right back where you were, especially with the current use of fentanyl, which is much stronger, and needing way more doses of Narcan to reduce or reverse that overdose. So that's an important factor if folks choose that they want to walk away and not be at the scene anymore, but just to remember that there's other long-term consequences that might come down either legally or for their health.
I also just wanted to quickly add on to that. I had worked in a shelter program where people that were staying there were allowed to use substances on site. And a lot of these folks are very experienced in their drug use and are generally going to know more about how they're going to respond to the substances they use than we will ever. But they're also very, you know, there's practical things like using the buddy system. So I've Narcaned people who absolutely do not want to talk to EMTs. They have huge traumas from emergency service providers. But they will, you know, let that person that shares that sleeping room with them or that they use with regularly be there with them, and they will make sure that that person doesn't go back into overdose. So encouraging them to just stay with someone who they trust to watch out for them. Some folks may even know before they fall into overdose that it's about to happen. And we've actually provided Narcan to people who have done it on themselves before that happens. So it's always good to contact emergency services, but you will often come up against resistance, or people will decline that.
Really great insight from you all. We've got a wonderful comment in the chat. So any words of inspiration for those of us who are nervous about administering, maybe never have, and want to gain a little expert advice and confidence?
I think for something of this nature, like the weight of it, you know, someone's life is the risk. And doing it for the first time, I had been taught how to use it, but I'd never actually done it before. And I've only used the Narcan nasal spray so far. I haven't needed to use intramuscular in the field yet. But I mean, you might be nervous about it, but once you've been trained and you know the mechanism of how to use a tool, I don't know, for me, I just kind of slip into response mode, and I don't really think about how I feel. There's a person, you know, in front of you who needs assistance, and they're not going to be able to provide that care for themselves. So If you find yourself in that space, I'd say just go for it. Narcan is very safe, or naloxone is very safe. If a person is not on opiates, it will not hurt them to use it on them. I've actually used Narcan on a community member who was over intoxicated on alcohol and ketamine, and it did nothing to them. They became unresponsive for a moment, but after using the Narcan, they, there wasn't a change except for, well, no, they were still unconscious. So you put them in the recovery position, make sure there's nothing in their mouth. You go through all the steps past administering Narcan for this person until they regain consciousness or until emergency medical services arrive. And sorry, there was a question that I saw earlier that.
Yeah, I'm curious if Maggie or Karen, you have thoughts on sort of that nervousness or not having done it before, and how you all have navigated that, or your colleagues have.
Yeah, I think for me, I was first introduced in a slightly different space as an EMT at a fire department. So it was just a part of our training, which definitely helped a lot. But yeah, in the end, you're very nervous about it. And I think that, like exactly what Jules said, it comes down to, this is a tool that's going to save someone's life. And so just really knowing how to use it. And it's okay if you're scared. It's a scary moment. Like it's, life or death. But if you have the tools and the capacity to do it, we should do it. And I think that if you're ever worried, there is always, you can call 911 and say someone has breathing problems and you're not really sure, they're just unconscious. So and you should be calling 911 anyway to bring them over. So that is also a way to call 911 without explicitly saying that the person is using drugs. You can say they have breathing problems and they'll send an ambulance over, and you can have that conversation with the EMTs when they get there. But you can also talk them through, like, hey, maybe I have Narcan. Should I use it? I'm going to use it. And then they can talk you through the steps. They can tell you how to do CPR. They can tell you how to do, the movements that you should do if like you're in this panic mode where you don't remember what to do. So you can stay on the line with dispatch and have them walk you through what needs to be done. So just, kind of remembering the steps, having it on you, thinking about it, like that's really what we can do to prepare. But in the moment, it's just deciding to act.
Yeah, I would totally echo all of that from each of you. It's normal to be scared. My first time giving Narcan, I was totally full of adrenaline and super scared, and it doesn't work right away. It takes 2 to 5 minutes for your dose to, hit the person. So there's that scary moment where you've done what you needed to do and you're not sure how it's going. Yeah, my background is as a medical assistant, and my first time I was in that position, it was hard, but it, just like everyone's saying, I mean, you could save the life of a really, really valuable community member. And if you have any, opportunity to do that, please, please, please don't be scared. There's very little you can do wrong. Like I think it's been mentioned, like Narcan is not going to harm someone. You are putting yourself at very, I would say, small risk, like responding to an overdose. People, I think, sometimes have misconceptions or fears about contact with fentanyl through the skin, potentially causing overdose or issues, but that's really not evidence-based, and you don't need to worry about any type of secondary exposure to substances at a scene. We give like these little CPR masks with our Narcan kits that are just basically like a plastic mask that you can put over the individual's mouth to provide rescue breaths if someone's not breathing. It's like a really good addition to do in a respiratory emergency like overdose, but that can just like minimize any like, mouth-to-mouth transmission with somebody. But yeah, you're not legally at risk. Like that's also part of the Good Samaritan law, is like attempts to like save someone, you're not going to be like liable or something. I've heard that from people before as a concern. So yeah.
Great, thank you. And I would say you are, you've got some really amazing resources between Kelly Ross and Wen and Maggie in the Robert Cluess Center and Reach. So if you are wanting to have more of these conversations within your teams, your colleagues, you know, we've got lots of resources to help with that for you all. So someone was asking in the chat, if Narcan or naloxone does not reverse all overdoses, would someone need to know what the person OD'd on before administering?
I think it's really hard to know exactly what they're OD'd on, and the step you do is same as we describe it over here. You check their response and you administer naloxone because it's unlikely to harm them. It's effective, but it doesn't help with other overdose. You call 911 and have the emergency personnel to make that determination, what did they overdose on, but you will give naloxone because it's not going to harm them for giving it.
And then we had another question that Jules responded to in the chat, but I'll read it out for everybody in case you're not seeing the chat. Does the nasal spray work quicker than the intramuscular shot? And Jules responded saying nasal Narcan usually is fairly quick, though depending on the strength of the substance someone has on board, it could take longer. And I think Maggie also sort of spoke to that 2 to 5 minute window of looking to see if it is working and reversing the overdose. So I think we may have covered some of this for you all, but I am curious, and maybe we'll start with Wen, and then we'll go to Jules and Karen and then Maggie. But I'm just curious, and if you've already said it, great, and just repeat it, because at this point in the pandemic, brains are maybe not at their best as they once were, and repetition is always good, especially for some adult learning. But what are couple of those things that you really want people to know about Narcan? The thing that you are just like, if I could shout from the rooftops, here's my thing about Narcan. So Wen, anything that you would add?
I think everyone should carry Narcan if they encounter someone might have overdose or they use opioid or substance, because not just overdose, not just happen to small group of people, it can happen to everyone. And you do not need a prescription for getting naloxone. It's fairly accessible, and I provided some resources where you can get free Narcan shipped to your home.
Jules and Karen.
I want to echo what Wen said. I definitely think that everybody should carry Narcan at all times. You never know what you're going to encounter in the world, and especially now with opioid use and I don't like calling it an opioid crisis, but I guess it is. There are a lot of people during COVID who were introduced to substances that they don't really have a lot of education around, and especially with these stronger synthetic opioid analogs. I have a history as a polysubstance user, and when I was younger, the things that I had access to were not nearly as potent. They were not nearly as available to the general public. They were not, there weren't a lot of random adulterants, it was mostly like pharmaceuticals being like actual pharmaceuticals being shared. The return of the pressed pill, like illicit pressed pills into the drug market, along with things like fentanyl and carfentanil and a lot of these analogs, I don't think a lot of people are familiar with the experience of being a long-term opioid user or a person with opioid use disorder, and they're in a far more risky situation in their use than a lot of these folks who may be, out using heroin for 10, 20 years of their life. So definitely anyone can make a difference. You know, it's unfortunate that some people don't even, you know, have a choice but to like lose their lives from this. And I think a lot of us have been personally affected by you know, losses in their life from opioid overdose. And now that there's something available to us where we can, you know, help address that, I think it needs to be everywhere. You know, in every business, bars have Narcan behind their, you know, counters now. And I think it's a valuable resource that everyone should be able to have available when they need it.
Yeah, totally agree. I think it's important, whether as a provider or a community member, to pay attention to economics and how that will always play into the drug trade. And what we're seeing now is a direct result of deep desperation and poverty. And that the way that drugs are being created now to meet that, you know, fentanyl's $3. That's insanely cheap. And so really recognizing that as a factor in overdose and recognizing how poverty and all of these things play into that, and carry naloxone, normalize it, tell people who use drugs that we love them, that their lives matter.
Yeah, you know, I think, I don't have the numbers, but if you look at fentanyl overdose deaths in King County, the numbers are just like staggering. In the last couple of years, like more people have died from overdose than ever before. And I think Narcan is just like a part of your first aid kit that everybody should have. It shouldn't be stigmatized. It's something really, really important that you know, could potentially have the opportunity to intervene on. Anybody that is interested, has questions, wants to talk, you can always come down to the Robert Cluess Center at Downtown Public Health, and we can do like a more thorough Narcan training for you. We do that all the time for community members, professionals, like whomever. So please do come on down. Yeah, it's really cool that so many people are interested in Narcan and drug user health. So I appreciate everyone being here.
Well, that is a fabulous place to end, because I am incredibly grateful to you all for being here, sharing your incredible expertise, your knowledge, talking about it in a way that I think is really accessible and real and I mean, I don't even think I need to say it, but very harm reduction, very trauma informed. It's the work you do. It's embedded, but let's just call it out because it's beautiful. So I am just going to repeat for folks. If you didn't see in the chat, Alex from Reach threw in his email for training. If you are looking for that, for a little fuller, more in-depth training for your program staff, colleagues. For those of you that are a little less familiar with Reach, they do amazing work around case management, outreach, you know, mental health, substance use, support, counseling. Thank you so much for your wonderful presentation. We've already had requests for the flyers, so I'm hoping I can maybe get that from you to share. Kelly Ross is also an amazing resource to access Narcan, as Wen went over earlier, do that training, help understand how to use it correctly. They've got some great videos online as well that are like super quick and short. And then as Maggie said, but I will expand on what they said, Robert Cluess is part of public health. They've got, still Capitol Hill and downtown. Awesome. Great. And this is a needle exchange for folks that need clean supplies and works for drug use, but they also do training, education, Narcan. And I think y'all are doing like Hep C testing. So there's kind of some, like you said, drug user health. So these are all amazing resources that you all can tap into. And I just can't thank you all enough for spending your morning with us, and very, very appreciated. We are going to move on now. We have Jason Austin from Seattle Human Services Coalition. Hi, Jason. Welcome back to the coalition. It's lovely to see you. Jason is here to talk a little bit with us about the campaign around wage equity. And so on that note, Jason, I'm going to hand the floor to you.
Thank you so much, Jody. It's lovely to be back here with you all. Good morning, everyone. My name is Jason Austin. I go by they, them pronouns. I'm an organizer with the Seattle Human Services Coalition, here today to talk to you about our Raising Wages for Changing Lives campaign, a campaign that seeks to define what equitable wages are for human services workers and to create an actionable plan to bring everyone to implement those wages. As I'm going through a short presentation, I'm going to put a link to our sign-on letter in the chat. Our ask of you all today is to consider adding yourselves as individuals and organizations to this campaign. I will share this again later, but just kind of wanted to put that in the chat for people to be kind of considering. So while I get my PowerPoint up here, the Seattle Human Services Coalition has been around since 1987. That was the first year that the city of Seattle formally put revenue into human services, sort of at a time in the 80s when the federal government was pulling back from investments in housing and human services resources. We've sort of been a jumping off point for human service agencies to participate in budget and policy conversations with the city of Seattle. And we're really excited to be shepherding some community work around wage equity. So first, some definitions. What do we mean exactly when we say wage equity? Every so many years, policymakers consider whether or not human service providers are compensated enough or if those compensation structures should be changed. And usually that conversation kind of goes through a competitive wage framework, which is observing wages comparable to or better than what other employers pay for a similar position, looking at what case managers make in a different part of the state or a different part of the country. We want to move away from this framework because market forces perpetuate the inequities of a racist, misogynist, capitalist society that keeps some wages low and others high. Care work has historically been performed by women and people of color, so simply replicating wage rates that the market produces is going to replicate those racist and misogynistic forces that keep these wages low. At an absolute minimum, what we believe service providers need are livable wages, wages that are sufficient to cover all of your basic living needs, housing, childcare, food, transportation, etc., without having to rely on public or private assistance. This is not nearly enough to adequately compensate and help to bring to thriving what our folks need. And so what we are hoping to fight for and quantify with this effort are equitable wages, wages that should be paid for this work, given the skill, expertise, and value of the worker, rather than at a historically suppressed market rate, which devalues work traditionally done by women and people of color. So how far are we from wage equity? Many of you likely participated in the 501 Commons Wages and Benefits Survey last year, looking at around 20,000 nonprofit workers at around 250 organizations. And the numbers at the bottom there really speak for themselves. The people who are on the front lines of caring for our children, offering emergency housing and survival services, fostering the care and the support to thrive are being paid significantly less than even the living wage and much less than a thriving wage. And even folks who manage to stay in the field long enough to get promoted to a program manager position are still not being adequately compensated for the work that they're doing. And we know that this puts kind of our entire sector in a precarious position. Governments at all levels rely on the skills and expertise of nonprofit organizations to build well-being in communities so that individuals can reach their potential at every stage of life. Human service providers and elected officials agree that human service workers are significantly underpaid for the difficult work that they do, which puts the whole sector in a precarious position. As the cost of living in Seattle and King County continues to skyrocket, it's becoming more and more difficult for human services workers to live in the communities they serve and to stay in their human services jobs. This results in high turnover and extreme difficulty in recruiting for these important positions, which then creates overtime cost burdens and retention issues. Chronic low staffing and high turnover results in the disruption of relationships between providers and program participants, which is really the connective tissue that we all rely on for the programs that we work for to be effective. And we see these impacts every day. I mean, some human service providers have to work 2 or more jobs just to make sort of their living expenses. Many human service workers are themselves at risk of homelessness and oftentimes qualify for the programs that they are administering. And it really strains our ability to be able to care for our community in as deep and secure of a way that we would be able to otherwise. Really quickly, I know that we're short on time, but I'd love to hear kind of a couple of reflections from the audience. You know, are you experiencing this yourself? Have you seen this at your program? What have the impact of low wages been in your field of work? And feel free to utilize the chat for this. Turnover along with long commutes. Absolutely, absolutely. Thank you, Heidi. And we know that this not only makes it challenging for, I just want to read the chat here, fewer qualified candidates applying. Yes, absolutely, absolutely. 60 vacant positions and is the size, okay, right. Yeah, so I mean, we are seeing this every day in, you know, people who can no longer justify staying in their positions when there are higher paid and much less traumatic jobs available elsewhere in the community. And this not only impacts the individuals within the system, but it's starting to have an impact on the system as a whole. And this is just one example. An article from the Times back in January, King County had purchased a property along Aurora Avenue North that it sought to turn into a 50-bed shelter programs for adults. DCHS put out a request for proposal, and all of the usual organizations who offer shelter services turned them down. They said, we are having difficulty with staffing our current portfolio of sites. We are unfortunately not in a position to be able to take on more, even though we would like to be able to. And, you know, many of you may remember that the severe weather shelter through the city of Seattle had to close a day early due to staffing constraints. You know, I think Mark Dones really said it well when they referred to this as a slow motion collapse of our system. Our community is at a breaking point, and we really need to work with funders and policymakers to find a solution to really bring folks back into this profession that they want to give their lives to, but can't. And that's what our campaign seeks to address. The work for this is underway. Last year, the Seattle Human Services Coalition secured funding from the city of Seattle to conduct countywide research to determine equitable wages for human services workers. The city is in the process of conducting a comparable worth analysis, which is an analysis that really breaks down on a very granular level the skill set that human services positions like a social worker possess, in an attempt to compare them to comparable skill sets that exist outside the field of human services. So comparing what a case manager does to comparable jobs in healthcare or comparable jobs working at a Fortune 500 company. This analysis will sort of benchmark these positions against jobs that have been historically held by white men in order to counteract some of the racism and misogyny baked into market-based wages. And ultimately, this analysis, we hope, will determine equitable wages that consider the skills required, difficulty, experience, education, and responsibility required to be good at this field of work. The city is very close to announcing who they plan to hire for this study. The Seattle Human Services Coalition will be working closely with this group to guarantee access to the data that they need. This firm will be collecting data over the summer and fall, including extensive interviews with direct service staff, as well as gathering information from the industry as a whole. They'll be analyzing and synthesizing the data over the winter with a report due at the end of January. So we hope to come back to spaces like this in February and March of next year in order to sort of present the results of the analysis and really using it as a roadmap to come up with short and long-term solutions to get us to pay equity. In terms of what we hope to do with the analysis, I think everyone in the community is going to have a role to play. We are going to be coming back to human services agencies to help you all calculate the resource gap based on analysis finding. So really looking at the results of the study, seeing what it would take to bring your organization up to equity so that we can provide policymakers with a dollar amount of what they need to be providing your program in order to adjust wages correctly. Ultimately, we want funders to be responsible for finding these additional resources, both public funders and private. To that end, we are bringing funders together to sort of look at the data to understand and create a roadmap for the additional investments needed to bring wages to equity. This effort is going to be many, many billions of dollars. And so we want to pursue some short-term solutions in order to give us sort of a step-by-step path to this. King County is interested in putting together some sort of a retention stipend for all homeless service providers. I'm sure many of you all helped lobby and advocate for the stipends for homeless service providers that the state of Washington put aside. And King County is hoping to replicate that and do something similar. Ultimately, we want to build on these short-term investments over the next couple of years to bring wages up to equity and really have a plan for how public and private policymakers will get there. And that's why I'm talking to you all today. We are at the point of the campaign where we are trying to build momentum. We are encouraging both individual community members as well as human services organizations to sign on in support of this effort. Thank you to the Coalition on Homelessness for adding your name in support and for supporting this work behind the scenes. We want as many of you and your agencies on board with this so that we can really have the muscle and develop the political will necessary to really implement the recommendations of the report. We have a once-in-a-generation opportunity to address wage equity in human services, but only if we can speak together in one voice. Thank you so much for giving me some time to share this work with you all. I'd love to use however much time we have left at the meeting to answer any questions folks have.
I think we've got time for a couple questions for Jason, and then we would love to share a little bit of some of our aligned work here at the Coalition. So any questions for Jason? Well, if you're thinking on it, contemplating, typing, I'm going to hand the floor to Allison, and we'll see if anything pops up while she's speaking.
Okay, thank you so much, Jason, for that very clear and comprehensive overview of the origins of this work, which indeed go back many years, and of the nature of this work, which really touches every single person who is in this field. It includes the child care workers, the folks who provide meals, the folks who help seniors and youth. And one of the things that we really want to remind all of you is that we are here to not only support you with things like the training about Narcan so that you can do your work better, with the mindfulness series that is coming up starting in the end of June, mindfulness in real life, but also with the advocacy so that some of the very poignant and all too familiar effects of years of suppressed and inadequate wages and years of suppressed and inadequate contracts for this work overall can be reversed. So I want to just flag for you, while we did work very hard in the state legislative process this year to secure the proviso that will allow for $2,000 stipends to homeless service workers. I am not sure that it's accurate to call those retention stipends. Among other things, we did all that work in January, February, and March, and we are hoping the stipends will be available around November. And also we know that they're one time and they're going to help. Nobody's going to turn $2,000 down, but they are not the same as increasing people's wages and benefits. So in addition, we also work to add another proviso that is going to do a statewide study taking a look at the wages that are paid in homeless services and housing. So complementary to the Seattle Human Services Coalition study at the City of Seattle on what the work is worth. And our advocacy is ongoing. This is not the last or the first time that we're talking about these issues, but our work includes investing in the workers as well as in the workforce as a whole, and trying to make sure that every single funding source, that means when we renew the Seattle Housing Levy next year, when we renew the King County Veterans, Seniors, and Human Services Levy next year, and when new sources of funding become available, we are raising these issues and ensuring that, that wages and benefits and things that help people do this work over the long haul are baked in. So we expect that in mid-July, we'll be doing, let's call it an educational session for members of the King County Council. And one of the things that we'll be inviting you all as coalition members to do is share a brief public comment. If you have the time, we don't have the date yet, but as soon as we do, we'll share it with you. If you have the time and you can sign up to give in-person real-time public comment, that's beautifully powerful and effective. But we'll also make it easy for you to send a quick email to your King County Council member and to share why you are asking them to elevate this as they begin their budget work. So thank you very much. That's just a quick little complimentary piece. And I do want to make sure that we share all the information about how you can sign up for our upcoming trainings, as well as our July membership meeting. And if you're not on our email list, you'll want to be on it, because this was all just one meeting.
We did pack a lot in. Yes, folks, thank you so much for being here, spending your time with us. Huge, huge thanks to all of our presenters for coming and sharing really important key information that's really laying out a lot of the work that we have ahead of us. So I'm going to have my colleagues help me throw in the links, but we've got our July 21st meeting. We're probably going to have the Regional Homelessness Authority back to talk about their 5-year planning. We've got Mindfulness in Real Life. That is on June 28th. That's a Tuesday. We've got You Don't Need a Home to Vote. Learn how to support folks participate in our democratic process. That's July 12th. And we've got our TANF and our Work First Public Benefits Are Key on June 30th. So sign up. We'll be filling your inboxes with all those links and good information, forward them on to people. And then just a quick heads up, I will definitely put this, but Neighbor Care and Compass at 77 South Washington are doing a resource day on July 13th from 10 to 2. They are going to have a ton of folks there. Vet services, public health is going to be there, Orca cards, insurance, haircuts. Coalition's going to be there doing some voter registration. So come. Tell your folks, come see us, come hang out, lots of really good information. So we're going to stop the recording and I'm going to bid you all a lovely day. Thanks all. Take care.